Story 1. I was called a coward for refusing to handle chemotherapy drugs without personal protective equipment at the veterinary hospital. No, thank you. It is not worth the risk. Story 2. Going forward, we are going to give you managerial duties. Will that include sick and vacation days? We will revisit that in the next 6 months, but in the meantime, we will need to readjust your pay. To be higher? Not initially. Story 3. They wanted me to work more hours and made me choose between work and college. I chose college. It was a retail store. Story 4. Every person in my department was immediately terminated after giving their 2 weeks notice. When it came time for me to leave, I used all my paid time off, returned from vacation, left my badge on my desk, and walked out. Clarification. I did not mean the entire department was let go. I meant that whenever an individual gave their 2 weeks notice, they were immediately terminated. Story 5. My boss said in front of everyone that none of us in the warehouse were worth what we were paid. 2 of us walked out that day over it. Story 6. The store manager kept telling me to watch the regional manager for stealing. The regional manager told me to watch the store manager for stealing. One day the petty cash was short by $100. And both managers angrily questioned the hourly employees. It was too much drama, so I walked out. It turned out that both managers had been stealing from the store. Story 7. I once quit a job with no notice because I soiled my pants. Story 8. There was a hostile work environment. A supervisor 20 years younger than me, who had been with the company about 15 years less than I had, screamed at me in front of customers. He had done that to others who had no choice but to take it, but I didn't need that job. I was almost retirement age and had enough years with the company to retire. I walked out the front door in the middle of my shift and never looked back. It was the best work-related decision I ever made. When I reached my car that day, I felt as if a 50-pound weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had been with the company since 1989 and had invested my stocks and profit sharing wisely. Suck it, Walmart. Story 9. My wife was sick in the emergency room at the hospital where I worked, pregnant with our first child. My boss would not let me leave to be with her. I quit then and there and went to the emergency room. He promised I would never work there again. We moved to another town so I could complete my doctorate. 4 years later, we sat in the same room for a meeting in that hospital. He asked what I was doing there. I told him I was months away from holding the same title he had. He had a heart attack about a year later. Karma caught up with him. Story 10. I was being micromanaged. My boss made everyone buy a notebook and write down everything we did during the day and how long each task took. We had to hand them in at the end of the day. If he thought we took too long on something, he would cut our hours. That was the final straw for me. There were many other things wrong with that place. Story 11. My boss changed the schedule at a high-adventure outdoor recreation facility and told everybody but me. I am a middle manager, so I was late, though I am usually very early. Luckily, I was able to get everything open on time. The other employees could not reach me because I had no service, so they called him. He showed up reeking of marijuana and whiskey after we opened, only to see everything running like a well-oiled machine because I had a staff I respected and who respected me. He did not like that he had made a mistake and that everyone now knew. He started yelling that I should be glad we were short-staffed or I would be fired, used obscene language, and gave me 2 middle fingers as he threw open the door. My staff and all our guests were watching. I gently laid my keys and radio on the desk and told him that he was now short-staffed. I then told the staff they did not have a sober manager on duty and that they needed to lock up the towers. I told the office manager to issue refunds or reschedules for everyone already there. I called his boss, the owner, and calmly explained what had happened. Story 12. The environment was toxic, with no respect and constant gaslighting. One morning I realized I did not owe them an explanation for protecting my peace, so I did not show up. Story 13. The boss accused me of stealing. I quit on the spot. The money was hidden where it was supposed to be. I assumed he was too high to see it. He apologized later, but it was too late. Story 14. I quit on the spot when the president of the law firm, my boss, told me I could use the bathroom only during my lunch break, so he could reach me at all times in the office. I was gone for half a day when one of his secretaries called and begged me to return. I demanded a retroactive raise of my choosing equal to 6 months' pay and some respect. I got it and never had another problem with him. Story 15. The restaurant owner brought in groceries in the middle of dinner service and expected me to put them away. Her daughter, who was my cook that shift, was leaning on the butcher block on her phone doing nothing. I was serving the entire dining room, 6 occupied tables, and a few individual meals at the bar while running the fryer, plating sides, assembling burgers, clearing my own tables, and washing my own dishes. I was already at my wit's end. A couple of weeks earlier, I had run the restaurant. From open to close, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., plus cleaning until 11 p.m., entirely by myself on my birthday, except for the bartender who arrived 2 hours late. When the owner dropped the bags all over the top of the freezer and my prep surfaces, then went and sat at an empty table as if she expected me to take her order, and her daughter did not even look up from her phone, I walked out the front door. I wish I had at least waited to process payments and collect my tips, but I was seeing red. Story 16. I was yelled at for not doing something while I was working on a Saturday. I did not get paid to work on Saturdays. I was so busy during the week that I needed to work Saturdays just to keep my head above water. After my boss finished yelling about my alleged failure on an unpaid Saturday, I packed my things and never went back. Story 17. I had asked for Sundays and Mondays off, the 2 slowest days of the week, so I could help take my dad to treatments. After 2 weeks, someone loudly asked in front of the whole crew, "Is your dad dead yet? Are you an inconvenience to schedule around?" I walked out on the spot. Story 18. The owner was a criminal. I had to get out of there before I was charged with something. He would not let another employee go to his mother's funeral. Story 19. The director created a toxic workplace. She spent hours in her office reviewing everyone's office chats. She came into my office and asked why I was overly nice and joking with some coworkers but only professional and polite with others. I asked if I was doing something wrong and refused to participate in the toxic behavior. I packed up my office and left at lunch. I deleted the files I was working on and reorganized the files I had to leave behind. Story 20. Many years ago, when I was in my 20s working a retail job, I told my bosses I needed one evening off about a month in advance so I could attend an event with my mother. When the schedule came out, they had me working until 9 that evening. I went to the manager and explained that I had asked for that night off and already had tickets. He said they needed me. I offered to work until 5, but he repeated that they needed me. I pointed out that I worked 6 or 7 days a week, had no life outside the job, and had confirmed it was okay before requesting the night off. This was to go somewhere with my mother, not to party. I told them to give me the night off as promised or I would leave. The boss refused. I packed up my things, clocked out, and left. The assistant manager chased me into the parking lot and begged me not to go, but I said I did not want to work for that boss anymore. I drove home laughing the whole way. Story 21. A troublesome student laughed at security while they were trying to gain control of the rowdy class for me. I did not have anything planned. I just could not stand being around those kids anymore. Story 22. I worked at a coffee shop and did everything a manager would do, but I was not a manager. I earned $10 per hour, opened and closed the shop, and worked every weekend. I told the boss I was getting burned out. He said he would come in early on mornings after I closed the night before to give me some relief. He repeatedly failed to show up and offered poor excuses. Other employees told me he would never do that for them. That was when I knew it was over. I texted him that I was quitting immediately and then blocked his number when he started complaining. Story 23. I asked for my anniversary off at my serving job months in advance. They scheduled me anyway. I quit the day before and had a lovely anniversary dinner at a different restaurant. Story 24. It was a name tag job I took to keep money coming in until an opportunity in my field arose. That opportunity offered a good salary and full benefits. I tried to be accommodating and offered to work through the end of the week, but the manager wanted more. I declined, revised my offer to stay only until my next scheduled break. and ended negotiations. Story 25. I worked in a toxic workplace with a micromanager. The owner had serious trust issues, so there were cameras everywhere, and the owner would call within 5 minutes if you did something wrong. The last straw for me was being scolded for not reading the daily rules after I had an emergency. I went to work without reading the day's rules because I expected to figure things out, but instead I was sent to my car in the freezing cold to read the rules and then given a pop quiz. 10 minutes of wasted time left me very upset. There were constant rules about what we could and could not touch. The owner was a bully and mocked an employee's depression by imitating them and saying they would hurt themselves. I am glad I left. Story 26. I was front of house, and when the dishwasher quit, I covered a few shifts while they hired a replacement. The next week I walked in and saw that, instead of hiring a new dishwasher, they had put me on the schedule for double shifts as the dishwasher for the whole week. I turned around and walked out without saying anything. Story 27. A friend of mine had a serious accident that changed his life forever. It made me realize I had always been planning for the future and never acting on those plans. My wife and I decided to act on plans we had discussed for 8 years. I quit my job 3 days later without notice, and within a month we moved the family halfway across the country to a new city with no job lined up. It all worked out, and we are living the life we had dreamed about for so long. Story 28. I found out I was essentially training my replacement. I left my keys and company phone on the desk at lunch and went home. I did not respond to texts asking if I was coming back to finish training the new employee. I had a temporary job lined up for the following Monday, so I quit on Friday. I was already somewhat considering leaving after the police showed up looking for the owner. That incident pushed me to actually do it. Later, I found out they raided the place, and the owner was arrested for bribing highway patrol officers to forge inspection papers for his fleet of trucks. He received only 1 year of house arrest. Story 29. I was forced to do the work of 2 others under the pretense of training and was punished for it. Quit. Story 30. Around 1984, I was training to be a driver at the United Parcel Service. The trainer was abusive and messed with me the entire time. I think it was because I had gotten the initial interview with the help of my father-in-law, who was a longtime employee. He would throw packages at me, hitting me in the head while my back was turned. After stopping, he would make me get back in the truck, click my seatbelt, turn the engine on and off, and exit the truck again if the key ring was not on my pinky finger when I exited. On the 3rd and final day, it was pouring rain. I loaded heavy photographic chemical boxes on my dolly to roll to the next customer's door. I closed the roll-up truck door, and as I turned, he shoved the dolly of chemicals into the gutter filled with rainwater and calmly said, "Now pick them up." I said, "No, you pick them up." And I walked away without a ride or anywhere to go. The trainer died about 2 years later from cancer. I went on to better things. Story 31. Poor management. No matter how many chances I gave them, they did not adjust schedules or provide our weekly tips. The baristas had to take care of everything while our manager sat around. Story 32. I was hired for a sales gig. They were strangely evasive when asked about the products. On my first day, I walked in and saw vans being loaded with speakers. I turned around and noped right the fuck out. I don't know if anyone remembers the scams where people drove around mall parking lots asking if others wanted to buy home stereo speakers that were garbage in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Story 33. I had been thinking about it for years. One day, the logical reasons keeping me from quitting mattered less than my desire to quit. Story 34. The McDonald's where I worked in a small town was robbed at gunpoint one morning. They called me to cover because they had to send the staff who were there home. They were understandably traumatized. I called back and said I was not coming in, not now or ever. Story 35. I dreaded the job every day. I was drinking more, which made it worse, and I would burn through sick time and paid time off as soon as I had it to avoid work, which caused problems later. One day I was on break and asked myself why this was my life and why I had to put up with it. Then I had an epiphany. I realized I did not have to. I walked in, signed out, and left without telling anyone. No one called me for 4 days. I had not quit sooner because it paid well, and I was afraid everything would fall apart. But it did not. Eventually, it worked out better than ever. Story 36. My ninth trainee in about 4 to 5 months was assaulted 3 times in 2 months. Two of the people who assaulted him had been trying to bully me for the 3 years I had worked there. Ignoring their attempts only made them try harder. The first 8 trainees all quit within the first week. This trainee worked his butt off and was doing an excellent job. We became close friends outside of work. His mistake was being the new guy. After the third assault, our boss fired him because it was an easier solution than firing 3 experienced employees. The day after he was fired, the 3 of them brought a cake with frosting that read, "This is to celebrate successfully getting rid of the new motherfucker." 3 other workers and I quit the next day. There were about 30 people working there at the time. About a month later, I learned that a few of my trainees had a higher hourly wage than I did, despite my longer tenure. The people I trained were being paid more than me from day one, even though I was actively teaching them how to do the job. Story 37. I requested a transfer to get away from an abusive boss. 2 weeks later, the manager avoided me until he went on vacation. The supervisor took me outside and said he could speak to me however he wanted because I was in the army and his father was a Marine drill sergeant. I walked away in the middle of his speech and told the acting manager that I was leaving at the end of my shift and would not clock back in. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said, "Go back in time and transfer me when I asked." She asked for something realistic, and I told her to fire my supervisor. She said she could not do that, so I restated that I was clocking out and not coming back. She then told me that 2 weeks' notice is customary. I asked if I would receive 2 weeks' notice or severance if I was fired. She said no. Story 38. My mental health suffered. My work essentially dissolved my department. They fired one of us for not meeting expectations and reassigned the rest to their call center. By God, the new manager was so happy they had no sympathy for what happened. Story 39. I went in on a Monday morning and discovered I was expected to do the work of 3 people. I did my best, finished my shift, went home, and texted them that I would not return the next day. If I had gone back, I would again have had to do the work of 3 people, so I chose to take a job that requires the work of 1 person. Story 40. A worker moved a 2-ton hydraulic pump over my head with a crane without warning. I could not move quickly. I went to the supervisor and told him he needed to do something. He just shrugged. I locked my toolbox and walked out. Story 41. I worked for an old, grouchy attorney for several years. He was a former service member, very stern and not a pleasant person. One day my young son was sick and I had to pick him up from school. That evening the attorney called and said we needed to come up with a solution to this problem. After realizing he meant my sick son, I told him I had the perfect solution to that problem. I no longer work for you. Story 42. My paycheck bounced. I guess. Is it a job if you don't even get laid? Story 43. When I worked for Amazon, a dog bit me on the ankle and my sock was full of blood. When I called dispatch to tell them what had happened, their first question was whether I could finish my route. I drove back to the warehouse and quit on the spot. Story 44. The manager was grumpy and moody all day because a customer had told him the football results he had been hoping to watch the replay of later in his office. I was 17 and in my first summer job. He yelled at me because he couldn't find a pair of scissors. As soon as he left, a colleague asked what his problem was. I told her he was looking for the scissors and asked if she had seen them. That was enough for him to storm up to me, nose to nose, and scream at me again. By then I knew I wasn't coming back after clocking out that day. I was already missing pay and holiday pay for working bank holidays. In my first job, I was trying to save up for a GameCube. He was creepy with some of the older staff and overworked the younger ones so he could flirt with others. It wasn't a fun retail job, but I had a target I was saving for. When I got ready to leave, the manager wanted to talk to me in his office. Because I didn't immediately respond, he physically grabbed me by the shoulder of my blouse and dragged me by my bra strap into his office to scream at me more. I have no idea what he said. I was in pure shock, outrage, and disgust, frozen there. I had been molested on holiday 3 years earlier, and no one was ever allowed to touch me randomly, let alone grab me. You can imagine what I was like when I got home. My mother and I wrote a very strongly worded letter to him and his company, and my stepdad dropped the letter and my uniform off the next day. The manager wasn't in, only a deputy who had never been there before, who apparently gasped, "Oh God," when they read my letter. A few weeks later, I received a written apology from the company, another from the manager himself, my missing pay with another apology, and a bonus of about £30 when I had been paid an abysmal wage. I managed to scrape together what I needed for my GameCube and my first 2 games in a bundle. Story 45. My micromanager had been difficult. I had already found a new job and was preparing to give 2 weeks' notice. She spoke poorly about me to another manager who told me about it, so I walked out. Since I was labeled incompetent, there was no reason to stay when another company was ready for me to start. I blocked her number, handed my keys to security, and never looked back. I was also in leadership there, and the manager she spoke to was a friend of mine from high school. She did not know that. Story 46. I got a better job, and my boss was unbearable, so I needed to leave. I made photocopies of my photos, took the originals with me, finished my work for the day, packed my things, and left. I never went back. Story 47. I was constantly pressured to work overtime. After lunch on Friday, my boss would ask me to work Saturday. This happened nearly every week due to massive turnover in a very small team. He took on new clients knowing we were already hard-pressed to finish existing work. This would not have been an issue if he were better at hiring. There were no promised raises. I was under constant pressure to work faster, and he required nearly daily updates on how long tasks took. To test him, I gave one estimate one day and a different estimate the next. Regardless of how long tasks actually took, he would say I could finish them in a shorter time. At the time, I had a sprained wrist that slowed me down, yet he hounded me to go faster with no regard for my health. That was the final straw. I called human resources and told them I was walking out the door. Story 48. It was 6 months before my planned retirement date, and they knew it. They tried to change my schedule and duties. I said, "Nope, I don't need this shit. I'm done." And I never went back. I worked 24.5 years instead of 25. I'm good with it. It didn't change my pension enough to worry about. Story 49. I had a fever of 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit and got berated when I tried to call in. I came in, but about an hour into my shift I began vomiting and had to run to the bathroom repeatedly for about 2 hours, roughly every 10 minutes. I told my boss, and she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You look fine to me." I took off my apron because I worked at Kroger, threw it down at her feet, and said, "Fuck this and fuck you." $10.75 an hour was not worth it. Story 50. I worked for a well-known artist doing highly skilled work for him. He complained that members of my team were taking too long in the bathroom, which was not true, and when he was stressed, which happened often, he would stomp about in a foul mood and set unattainable deadlines. One day he was abusive about some second-hand equipment he had bought and was berating me for trying to make sure one of his staff was okay. I had come in early that day to keep the work moving and had just had enough. I went to the restroom, decided the job was not worth it, returned to the studio, left my keys on the side, and collected my things. When I got out of the building, my entire team had walked out behind me. The artist had lost over half his workforce in one go. The funniest part was that we all received a text asking if we had gone to lunch together because he could not find us. It was the best feeling in the world to walk away from that toxic situation. Story 51. The district manager of my bookstore chain came to my house, pushed past my useless roommates, and yelled at me at the foot of my bed about how messy the calendar display was. Thankfully, I was dressed and just reading in bed. When he finished, he said I had to show up early the next morning with corporate to get retrained on displaying calendars. My roommates shrugged and said, "Oh well," he seemed mad. "We figured it was important." The next morning I showed up, handed my keys to my boss and said, "No hard feelings. I quit." I then took the next train to spend Christmas with my fiancée. I really screwed him over because I was the manager of the top producing store in his district at the height of the Christmas rush. He had to run my store without a manager for months until he found a replacement. Quitting in front of corporate probably didn't make him look good either. Story 52. You usually do not quit for serious reasons. One day you simply quit because of something trivial, and that is it. Story 53. I got a call from my father at 4 a.m. Right before I took it, my manager passed by and told me someone better be dead if I was looking at my phone while on the clock. I followed him outside, where two other managers were, and called my father on speakerphone. He told me my grandmother had just passed away. I knew that was the only reason he would call at that hour, and I wanted all the managers on duty to know what my supervisor had said. I never came back. Story 54. I worked at Kmart for 2 years without taking a day off. I wanted to attend my sister's high school graduation, but they said no. Story 55. Poor management. That's it. Not the company, not the coworkers. Story 56. The shop owner blamed me for her store not being open on what would have been a very busy day. Mother's Day. She kept asking me what gave me the right to decide to close her store without talking to her first. I did not close the store. It never opened because the opener who was supposed to bring the keys never showed up. I arrived an hour after the openers were supposed to be there setting up and found the other opener just sitting there. She had not tried to contact anyone. I messaged the owner, the manager, and the group chat. No one answered. After 30 minutes, I left to pick up a shift at my other job. This was not the first time. On 2 other occasions, I drove around town in my own car, using my own gas to borrow someone's keys. But this was the first time I could not reach anyone. The owner decided to blame me. I had been there for barely 2 months. She should have blamed the person who did not show up or the other barista who had been there longer and should have tried harder to find a key holder before I arrived. Instead, she blamed the person who actually tried to get the store open that morning. Fine. Fuck her then. If she hated me so much, there was no point in working for her anymore. She yelled at me on a Saturday. I was scheduled to work a full Sunday shift. The only full shift because the other baristas were attending either morning or afternoon church services. I simply did not show up, so she could not open that day. 3 Sundays in a 5-week span, the shop was closed when she had planned only one. Laughing out loud. Fucking bitch. Story 57. Long commute, 2 shifts a week, minimum wage, dumb coworkers. You get the point. Story 58. I worked 1 day a week. During the slow season, there was not enough work, so they told me not to come in. They did that 3 weeks in a row on my scheduled day. The last time I was across the street filling my gas tank before I went in. I stopped showing up. They never called me back until a few months later in the busy season, when the manager asked if I could return. I declined, and that was the end of it. Story 59. I waited tables at Glory Days Grill. One of the part owners made his 16-year-old nephew the shift lead and spoke to me as if I were property. Don't question me, just fucking do it. I took the complaint to the owner. He asked what I wanted him to do. All I wanted was an apology, but he acted as if that was unreasonable, so I walked out. In hindsight, the request was something small, like asking us to roll extra silverware, but his response sent me over the edge. I work hard, and I didn't need the part-time restaurant gig to get by. Story 60. I had moved to London for a new job. My wife was pregnant with our first child at the time and had to go into intensive care to deal with a long-term health issue. I called in and told my boss the situation and that I would be back in as soon as I could. A couple of days later, I returned to the office to find a holiday request form waiting for me on my desk. Nothing else, just the holiday form. I absolutely lost it. I could not remember being that angry before or since. I stormed into his office, told him exactly what I thought, and resigned on the spot. My colleagues had seen me shaking with anger before I went in, and they thought I had hit him. He clearly had not expected me to be upset, and his boss was furious when he found out what had happened. I relented and agreed to work 1 week's notice as a favor to the man who had hired me, and then I left. Best decision ever. That place was toxic. Story 61. I am doing that this week. I just arrived home from my new job. I am still at my other job. I am the assistant general manager at a Holiday Inn and have worked in hotel and hospitality all of my adult life. I am 42. Today, I started my new job as the housekeeping supervisor at a nursing home. I will continue at the Holiday Inn, but Friday will be my last day. I am not telling the general manager until I clock in that night. I will tell him by text. I have never done this before, but I work for the most morally bankrupt, unprofessional, horrible people I have ever worked for. They kept my holiday pay even though I worked on Labor Day and everyone else received it. I was told I make too much, so I do not qualify. I make $15 per hour in management. Give me a break. The general manager threw bleach on my expensive winter parka a year ago and promised to replace it when he could afford it, though he never has. He has taken 2 personal vacations during which I had to cover for him. During one of those vacations, he gave all of the housekeepers the weekend off and did not tell me. It was a football weekend and we were sold out, so I had to do all the housekeeping, all the laundry, take care of the guests, and handle the office work by myself. He hires young women he finds attractive, has sexual relationships with some, gives them weekends off, and makes me cover their shifts. I make all his business phone calls, create all the training packets, respond to online reviews, open the kitchen, cook, wash dishes, close the kitchen, and handle his emails while he takes entire workdays off. I am sick of it. I will not give 2 weeks' notice. I will tell him just before the weekend starts that I will not be back, so he will have to work for once. Good riddance to that place. Story 62. The classic saying people leave bad bosses, not jobs. A new boss arrived and was a complete arsehole. He changed my title, claiming that information technology work had dried up. I was the head of the department and he did not ask me, so I had no idea how he decided that. He sent me to London to count plug sockets for a week. Then he complained that all the information technology work was slacking and said it was my fault, even though he had told me not to do it anymore. I wished him the worst. Ironically, the company went bankrupt anyway. Story 63. After fighting many battles, I realized the conflict would not end and chose a way out. Story 64. They sent my job overseas and then decided we should all train for a different department with much worse work. On the last day of training, they threw a pizza party. I said, "Oh, is this my going away party? How did you know?" The head trainer replied, "What? We're all going out to the floor after lunch." I said, "Not me. I start my new job on Monday. Thanks for the pizza." Story 65. I reached my limit. It was a toxic workplace with bullying and gaslighting. Felt like a nightmare. After 12 years, I had enough. I walked out and never returned. Story 66. I was regional manager for a chain of restaurants. The owner wanted to fire one of the general managers, and I did not agree. He said, "I am firing him today at noon and changing your role to general manager of that store." I showed up right as he was firing the general manager, put my keys on the table in front of him, and said, "I quit." Story 67. I worked on a factory assembly line. I was trying to join the military and had to miss some work for it, which led to a written reprimand for excessive absences. During a lunch break, I grabbed my lunch bag, drove home, and turned off my phone. I hated the job, so I did not need much of a push. Story 68. They watched me do my work and then lied that I did not do it. They overloaded me with work and lied on my performance evaluation. There was inappropriate touching. I told them to stop. They moved me to different areas to isolate me. The worst was interfering with my ability to care for my incapacitated parent. No mercy was shown. After my parent died, the harassment continued. I experienced rapid weight loss from the stress and nearly died. The combined stress of harassment and caregiving was unbearable. I am not complaining about caregiving. It is not an easy job. The workplace harassment compounded it and higher-ups were involved. I quit abruptly so they had no chance to 1. Gaslight me, 2. Play possum and then strike again, 3. Carry out the counteroffer con, 4. Strong-arm me into staying, 5. Find and train a replacement for me for a job they had sabotaged, 6. Know where I was going. I hope I did okay. Story 69. I worked at Starbucks as a shift supervisor before mobile ordering. A new store manager arrived and decided she wanted me gone. She called me in for a meeting and told me I was being fired at the end of the week. At the end of the week, I was scheduled for the next week. It turned out the district manager had told her after she fired me that there were not enough shift supervisors in our district and the store could not afford to lose me. so she tried to gaslight me, saying she had never actually fired me during our last meeting. I already had another job lined up, so I told her she was a clown and walked out. That location closed shortly afterward, and the last I heard she was back selling jeans at American Eagle. Story 70. I got a new job. Working at Walmart sucked. I think I'm still not eligible to work there, apparently 25 years later. Story 71. Sometimes the final straw isn't one big thing. It's 100 tiny cuts. You wake up one day, realize your piece is worth more than the paycheck, and just walk out. No notice, no guilt, just relief. Leaving wasn't quitting. It was reclaiming freedom. Story 72. I was making more money than before. I was promised I could make even more. I was told my family life would improve and that I would not have to work overtime or weekends. All of that was true to an extent. Overtime occurred, but only about 5 hours. I was salaried and earning 6 figures. My family life improved, but I found it mentally difficult to clock out. What got me was that my boss had absolutely no clue how to run my department and micromanaged everything. I had to train myself for the most part, and I had some amazing people on my team. My boss started having me cut payroll. Nobody held it against me. I was between a rock and a hard place. It made it very difficult to learn while being extremely short-staffed. Then one day he called to tell me that one of my employees was being paid way too much. We needed to reduce him, and he ordered an immediate cut of $100 a week from his pay. That was a Friday. On Monday I quit. I walked out without notice, going from a $125,000 salary to unemployed. Story 73. The owner's daughter yelled at me and threatened to fire me if I did not fix a problem she had previously warned would occur if certain practices were not improved. I facilitated the process and resigned the next day. Story 74. I completed a commission piece that required extensive research, tracking down individual parts, and dealing with international import laws. There was also creative work to determine exactly what the client's significant other wanted, all without revealing the surprise. It was almost 2 years of work. The client was ecstatic and came to pay for it on my day off, but a coworker took the sale and the commission. I found out when I returned to work. The owner contacted us to congratulate the coworker on their hard work, announced it was the highest commission piece to date at the company, and said the coworker would receive a bonus on top of the commission. He said we should all aspire to work as the coworker did. My manager, other coworkers, and the client tried to correct the owner, but he refused. He had always had a soft spot for that staffer, and his ego would not allow him to admit the mistake. I did not care about the acknowledgement, but the outright theft of money that would have helped my family was unacceptable. You do not mess with my family. I gave immediate notice of my resignation. Story 75. After the coronavirus disease 2019 shutdown, my mom got me a job where she worked. Unfortunately, my manager disliked my mom because my mom always outshined her, but everyone else liked my mom, so the manager could not go after her. She went after me instead and would constantly tell my mom about all the difficult things she was putting me through. It upset my mom quite a bit, so I went to human resources after 2 weeks and resigned. I can tolerate a lot of mistreatment from people, but I was not going to be used as ammunition to harass my mom. The manager was fired a few months later after everyone complained, and I found a job that I really enjoy. Everything worked out in the end. Story 76. Stress caused by new upper management who broke the rules but protected themselves. Story 77. I gave a gentle but damning critique of my boss's technical architecture for a product we were working on. 3 days later, I was presented with a harsh list of my shortcomings and told I was being placed on probation. I called a company that had been recruiting me, was hired, and submitted my resignation. I left by lunchtime, started the next day, and never looked back. Story 78. They kept making jokes about my appearance and race. I should have known when they said they were a family. Story 79. I was told they were downsizing my department of 3 people. I was in the middle. The person below me, who had tenure, did little except bark orders. They said I was finishing at the end of the week. It was my last day and they had a big, urgent job the following week. I was told they would keep me on for that week to help with repairs. Monday arrived and we spent about 14 hours on the job. The whole week would be like that. I chose not to go back the next day. I did not need the money and felt they were using me when it suited them, even though we were swamped and there was no way one other person could handle all the work. I was very frustrated with the company. They went bankrupt 8 months later with half their fleet needing repairs. Story 80. I went in for my first shift. He did not have me fill out any tax paperwork and then showed me how he pays his employees cash under the table and showed me a Google document with all his employees' personal information. Then he called me stupid because I did not know how to make something on my first day. I had another job offer, so I took it and left. Story 81. I was sexually assaulted at work. My boss could not understand why I refused to be dropped off at the place where I had been assaulted. My car wasn't working and she suggested a ride-sharing service. After that, she cut my hours to 4 hours a week. Felt petty, so I left without notice and blocked her number. Story 82. I worked as a salad bar attendant for about 25 minutes when I was 18. Story 83. As a teenager, I started a new supermarket job after school. On the first day, there was nobody to train me on the checkout. The manager left me with his live credit card, taken from his wallet. The till was in training mode, but he left it with me and went off to lunch. Next, they tried to get me to work the delicatessen counter on my own with no training. That counter had a meat slicer, and most of the meats were cut to order. I figured this manager looked like he lost his own money, the training staff, and maybe a couple of fingers per shift, so he wouldn't miss me. I went home and mailed a resignation letter effective immediately. I got paid for 2 weeks that I did not work, and they never asked for the uniform back. Story 84. I was a teenager working in housekeeping at an elderly care center. The facility's number of residents declined, so I was transferred to another center. I lasted a week and then quit because the supervisor had me doing her work, cooking lunch in addition to my regular tasks. I knew little about cooking for 20 people, and she became angry with me. What made it worse was that she sat in the kitchen and watched me while chain smoking. This was in the 1990s. I left without giving notice. Story 85. I grew tired of being micromanaged, had my goals changed without notice, and received threats of a performance improvement plan. I quit in frustration and the next day applied to their largest in-state competitor. I got the job and am much happier there despite the pay cut. Story 86. I was 19, working in a nursery with a bastardized view of the Montessori philosophy, which in their minds meant you could not say no to children regardless of how they were behaving. I had not begun my qualification but was doing the same work as a qualified member of staff, including an hour of planning at night when I got home. At the end of one shift, I was about to sign out at the office when I was called back onto the floor. The manager then lectured me about the state of the toilets. She had let the fully qualified member of staff who had been responsible for supervising the last few trips to the toilets that night go home and expected me to clean them. I cleaned them because I was a mug and then told her I would not be back in the morning. The look of panic in her eyes was incredibly satisfying. She told me to take the next day off and that she would see me on Monday. Monday came and she phoned me asking why I had not come in. I laughed and hung up. Fuck you, Hillary, and fuck you, the Hamilton School. Thankfully, neither are still in existence. Story 87. I worked in a call center doing outbound sales. My manager was an asshole. He constantly made up reasons to reduce my commission for trivial things, like being a minute late returning from break. The job was a stopgap. I already had a confirmed start date for an apprenticeship, so I was just working to pay bills and had mentally checked out. I used to do overtime and push to hit targets for commission, but I hated the job, the company, and most of the staff. As soon as I started counting down to my new role, I went on work to rule and did nothing more. The manager obsessed about being under target for that time of the month and pushed especially hard for overtime because we were short a few people due to illness. I clocked in a minute early and left a minute late. One morning we had a 30-minute unpaid briefing before our start time, so I arrived at my normal start time. He verbally laid into me in front of the team. I told him I do not work for free and he can go fuck himself. I dropped my clock card on the floor and never looked back. Story 88. Okay. I was working at Papa John's making pizzas. I told my manager at the beginning of my shift that I was having stomach issues and would have called out if I could. A couple of hours later, I was vomiting in the staff bathroom. If you know anything about the food industry, you are required to be sent home if you get sick because it is a hazard, but my manager forced me to stay for 2 more hours. After I left, I immediately messaged the work group chat saying that I would not be coming in for my next shift. Estimated time of arrival. Fuck you, Anthony. Story 89. This is a longer story. My departure was a forced resignation during the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020. At the time, I had been a lead cage cashier at my casino for 9 years. I could have been promoted to supervisor, I even acted as one at times, but I did not want the hours and the pay was not much higher. I had a reputation for being one of the best and most reliable leads and cashiers. My cage manager even said this. I maintained a low variance and low exception rate, processed transactions quickly, and trained almost all the new hires. I took pride in my work and loved my job, my coworkers, and the many regular customers I had. During the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020, my casino was shut down. The graveyard supervisor and lead were either let go or had quit, so management planned to transition to a new supervisor and wanted me to work the graveyard shift as support for the foreseeable future, a few months to maybe a year or more. Some context about my position and life situation. I had worked the swing shift from 4 p.m. to midnight for the last 8 years and had no intention of leaving. I was married with 3 children, 2 of whom were in elementary school. My wife worked early mornings, 6 a.m. to noon, so I was responsible for the morning routine, taking the 2 older children to school before the lockdown, and caring for our 3-year-old until my wife got home. I was on the phone with my boss and he told me I was the best lead they had and they needed my strength and expertise on the graveyard shift. I asked what hours they expected, and he said either 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or midnight to 8 a.m. I had worked graveyard years earlier and hated it, but I was willing to cooperate if my boss would work with me. I said I could work 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. at the latest, but not later because someone needed to be home with the children. My boss would not compromise and said 10 p.m. was the earliest I could start. He told me to take the hours or they would let me go. I asked, "You are willing to lose me and replace me instead of having someone else cover the graveyard shift?" He said yes. I was forced to resign over the phone during the lockdown. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.